let me back up just a little bit in terms of there's no evidence because when Jeffrey Epstein's homes were raided, there were reportedly hard drives worth of material, no doubt sexual material in his closet. And they're right next to the Ark of the Covenant in some, government archive or something like that. Secondly, let me speak up for the victims. If you want to put quotes on that, you may. Just one thing. So I do agree that it takes two to tango. And I think these victims are a little bit unfortunate or non-ideal in this sense. They're all hot. They're all hot chicks. And if you are hot, you're born that way, and you're of a certain personality disposition, you're more likely to go into a sensual profession. You are likely to gravitate to massage. Now, I don't think all masseuses are prostitutes. I got in trouble thinking that one time. I just walked in. I was on vacation, just walked in naked to a massage parlor, and they called the police on me. That was so rude, very unreasonable. But no, just kidding. Um, Not all masseuses are prostitutes, but many are. And even if you don't want to be a prostitute, you gravitated towards that sort of sensual profession. Many of these women were promised by Ghislaine, do you want to be a Victoria's Secret model? Like, I know people. And so they had a little ambition going on there. They weren't, in most all cases, they weren't snatched from their bedrooms and kidnapped and thrown to the island. Maybe there are cases of that, but with most all of them, it takes two to tango. They had a little bit of ambition. They went back to the Epstein's mansion over and over. They maintained contact with the Epsteins afterward. Maybe they thought, this was terrible. I was molested by the Epsteins, but, I still want to be a Victoria's Secret model. And there's no doubt that when you have that type of personality and you're hot, you are also a narcissist. And so we have a lot of these women heavily Botoxed on stage saying things, some of which are untrue. But even if they're not ideal witnesses, I do chafe a bit at what I've seen from Michael Tracy, and I guess Hanani has jumped on this boat, of just tearing down the whole thing due to individual problems. It's a kind of composition fallacy. Did Shakespeare misspell a word in Hamlet? Oh, I can't believe you misspelled that word. What a terrible play. That's fallacious. And so I do feel like you're looking at, say, Guiffre, however you pronounce her name, who committed suicide. She might very well be traumatized. She might be mentally unstable to begin with. And you're looking at that and saying, she said things that are wrong. She's recanted multiple times. She wasn't even used in the trial because she's an unreliable witness. She recanted things she said about Dershowitz, I believe. And he's bragged about this. But focusing on those details, are you just losing the big picture where you're saying, look at this shiny object over here. You're not seeing the forest. And the forest is, again, even you would admit this looks a hell of a lot like a blackmail cult, a compromise situation, or at the very least could easily be used in that way. And they're collecting like Pokemon. You have to have them all. They're collecting all of the movers and shakers from Steven Pinker to Bill Clinton to the wheelchair science guy. And you're going to just blackmail them all with the sex ring because men, if we've got one failing, it is pussy. And it's the one true way to get what you want. And so even if the victims are not ideal and they're mentally unstable, that doesn't mean that they're wrong.
I want to make a very simple point about the blackmail claim, which is that if I was Benjamin Netanyahu and I wanted to, have the Judenreich have this, basically this Axis Zionism emulating the Nazis sort of thing, I would blackmail people. Like, for instance, Lindsey Graham.
Mhm.
I don't even want to make an allegation, right? But it's like maybe Lindsey Graham did something
He's a
terrible and
little light in
unthinkable.
the loafers.
He's
Yeah.
a little light in the loafers. Maybe he did something unthinkable and there's blackmail on him. And Netanyahu is using that to make him a slave for Israel. Like that is a compelling narrative, I think.
Hmm.
But when you list off all these friends of Jeffrey Epstein, they were not dedicated slaves of Israel. And Bill
Mm.
Clinton was the guy who campaigned against Netanyahu. Barack Obama was the guy who did the Iran deal. Why? He did it because in 2013, Netanyahu refused to come to the table and do a two-state solution. And Obama just pushed and pushed and pushed in it, and Netanyahu wouldn't give an inch. He said, "Okay, well, I'm doing an Iran deal then. That's your punishment. And when you want to come back to the table and have a peace process, then maybe we can rethink the Iran deal." But he treated him that way, and all of the people on Epstein's friend list, and I do believe he was friends with these people. I also think he was a narcissist, and narcissists have friends, but the way they have friends is very weird. So, like, he had this painting of Bill Clinton in a dress
Hmm.
because he enjoyed kind of humiliating his friends. And so, all of these tapes, we don't have the tapes, right? So we can speculate. And so the first speculation is that it's all child rape. There's no evidence for that. The second speculation is that Jeffrey Epstein basically had a bunch of hot of age models, over 18 models around him at all times. I kind of detail in the article how, Jewish financiers in the 1980s would hold these same kind of parties. He didn't invent these types of parties,
Sure.
right? The Epstein parties, Epstein's Island, all of that is old hat. It's nothing new. And you have hot young women around, and because, as you said, these women are strivers, they're trying to get somewhere in Hollywood or the industry, and so you don't even need to pay them. They just voluntarily sleep with these men, and everyone is happy with the arrangement until 30 years later when, they didn't get the career that they wanted, and now they're
Hmm.
bitter and now they want some revenge. But that was what Epstein was doing. And I think it's possible that he like recorded his friends having sex. He did that because he's a weirdo, he's a pervert, he's a narcissist, not because he wanted to blackmail his friends and destroy and force them to be slaves for Israel. That's not what was going on. Specifically about this Ehud Barak versus Netanyahu dichotomy, you don't donate $3 million to Netanyahu's opposition if it's just like this monolithic, all the Jews are together and happy. And Netanyahu doesn't rail against Epstein and push the investigation against Epstein if they're all on the same team. They're not. They legitimately hate each other for real substantive reasons that are relevant if you're an American and you don't want this, anchor of Israel around your neck. This internal dispute among Jews and among Israelis is relevant because whoever comes out on top, they can marshal the intelligence resources of Israel, which are formidable. They can coordinate with APAC and these lobbying organizations. So it's this entire ecology that when you're the head of state of Israel, that impacts America. And
Hmm.
so we should want, the lesser of two evils at least. And I think in this case, Jeffrey Epstein was the lesser of two evils. I'm speaking politically. As a person, narcissist, creep, weirdo, pervert, did weird things like with his friends, like recorded his friends having sex. The other alternative I'll mention is that he was gathering intelligence. He was an intelligence agent at the end of the day. And I think that he was working for American intelligence. And I think part of that was you have conversations and you record those conversations. So when you see a tape that says, Bill Clinton on it, it's not necessarily Bill Clinton having sex. It could be Bill Clinton revealing state secrets
Hmm.
that various intelligence services want. That is my simplest point possible, is that a blackmail scheme makes total sense for Lindsey Graham. It makes absolutely no sense for George Soros and Bill Clinton and Bill Gates and those sorts of people. The only oddball that I see is Alan Dershowitz. He's much further to the right than a lot of those other characters. And I kind of talk in the article about,
But he wasn't
why that
always
might
that
be.
way. It's what
Yeah, he
you were saying.
wasn't
He was
always that
more of
way.
a
Yeah.
promoting a Palestinian state, even though he's
Mm.
obviously as strong a Zionist as they come.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, he's had kind of a personal transformation, but that's the only sort of fly in the ointment. But otherwise, none of these people are like Nazis. None of these people are like Father Coughlin or whatever people expect out of him. Like, obviously, all these people are Zionists at the end of the day. They believe in Israel's right to exist. And so they
Hmm.
are Zionists in the way that, Joe Biden said, I'm a Zionist, right? But at the
Hmm.
same time, they are putting so much more pressure and limitations on Israel than the alternative, which is this Netanyahu Trump alliance where anything goes and there's just no restraint whatsoever. And I say that in a sort of self-hating way because it's like, I wish that liberal internationalism had won the day. I wish that Al Gore won the election and we
Yeah.
had a Palestinian state and we had a
The
population
Camp
trans.
David Accords in the
Yeah,
90s. And yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. It's like I wish that liberalism proved itself to be this competent system that can overcome these challenges. But what I call the Axis Zionists, because before Netanyahu, Shamir, the leader of Likud in 1942, he was reaching out to the Germans and saying,
Hmm.
"Give us guns so we can fight the British." It's like that kind of biting the hand that feeds you and backstabbing and like just virulent anti-Anglo attitudes on the part of Likud, this hostility. It's not a generalized Goyim thing. It's like specifically they actually hate the British and the Anglo Americans, and they'd rather support the Russians or they'd rather support the Chinese just because they aren't the British, because they have this historical memory of, oh, well, if the British didn't blockade, if they just let the Jews of Europe escape the Holocaust, so they actually blame the British more than they blame Hitler for the Holocaust. That's their kind of logic, right or wrong. That's the way that they see it. And so in a secret way, it's not Hitler. In fact, Hitler is an ally because he did the transfer agreement. The British
Right.
didn't do a transfer agreement. Hitler was the greatest thing for Zionism that ever happened. And so in a way, they have this kind of weird respect. Like, yeah, well, if we were goys, we would be like Hitler too. That's the attitude that you see of someone like a Costin Alamario or something. It's like this mutual begrudging respect of like, you know what, as a Jew, I can understand a Nazi, or as a Nazi, I
Yeah.
can kind of understand a Jew, rather than that the liberal internationalist, which is just totally horrified by both sides and wishes there was some alternative. But history has unfolded. What has been done, and we can't undo that and just say like, well, let's go back to the drawing board with the Palestinian
Hmm.
peace process, give it one old shot. Maybe if we can get a Democrat in 2028, we could turn this thing around. No, at some point, you have gone too far. And Israel at this point, I believe, has entered this escape trajectory where even if we withdrew all the foreign aid and we started to sanction them and we did, you know what? They would just turn to the Chinese, they would just turn to the Russians, and they would provide immeasurable intelligence benefits to this Eurasianist project. Because, as I said, the Chinese have no aggressive forward velocity into the world. They don't want to dominate the world. The Russians are basically being cucked by the Chinese. Their economy's hanging on by a thread because of Chinese support. So they're a non-entity. But it's the Israelis who actually possess that kind of, Kalergi said this, that they actually possess that aggressive spirit that pushes things forward. And,
Hmm.
and that's basically what Bolshevism did, is it took a Jewish elite and put it in charge of this highly fertile Slavic mass. And they industrialized the country in a couple of decades and made it into a war machine.
Yeah.
So there is a precedent for Jews doing this, of taking over system which are inert in and of themselves, but actually taking that mass and organizing it in such a way that it gains a vector. And I think that's what you would basically see the relationship between Israel and China developing if we did take that posture of like, well, we're just going to, kick Israel out of the United Nations or something. They would say, okay, well, fuck you. And now we're going to burn it down even harder. You thought we were going hard against you before. Now we're really going to go hard against you. So whether we like it or not, this Jewish civil war, which basically has been won by Likud, it affects all of us. You can say, well, I wish that the Jewish state had never appeared. I wish that Zionism had never happened. It was a tragedy from the beginning. You can hold that position, but what has been done has been done. And so moving forward, I mean, my position is sort of fatalistic and just like, I don't see any potentiality for some AOC type figure to come to power and to turn the ship around and say, no, 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 we're going to do it this time. It's over. Like Palestine is over. Israel won, and we're going to have to just move on in some way and try to kind of clear up the wreckage and to make the best that we can out of it. But that two-state solution has been dead, and people are clinging to that, and they're trying to resurrect it. I think it's a fool's errand, and you just sort of have to move on while
I
recognizing. Yeah, go ahead.
I totally agree with that. I want to just break in really quick because you mentioned the fly in the ointment of your theory was Dershowitz. Is Trump another fly in the ointment? Because you know, uh, Trump talks about how he loved Democrats or he's a conservative on most things, but the Democrats are right on that. That was sort of the Trump we knew in the 90s, the Reform Party Trump. And even in 2016, you had talk of national health care, and he did not play the culture war, sort of remarkably. Did not bash gays or anything like that. I think a lot has changed after 2020. But what I mean is this: Trump is in line with all of these right wing Republicans who say that Bibi Netanyahu is their best friend. And that goes from Mitt Romney to Ted Cruz to Lindsey Graham and on. I love Bibi. We were having lunch the other day talking about the West and, civilization and Christ and all this kind of stuff that they talk with him about. Trump is in line with them. Trump gave Israel maybe not everything that it wanted, but pretty damn close. Golan Heights, embassy movement, etc. Trump has said some critical things about Israel and Gaza, but you have to read between the lines. So it's basically, it's got to stop. This is a terrible war. It's making all of us look really bad, is basically what he said. He did not stand up on behalf of the Palestinians. It was basically the optics of this thing have gone out of control, which he's of course right about. And Trumpism, maybe not in 2016, but definitely now, you see this MAGA alignment with the third worldism that you associate with the Israeli far right. Bibi Netanyahu campaigned with giant posters of Vladimir Putin in making these appeals to these Russian Jews, maybe dubious Jews who came over from the Soviet Union and who are still Russian nationalists outright. MAGA as well. It's bizarre for me as a 40-something-year-old person where the far right in the United States is now pro-Russia and blames NATO. That is the exact opposite of the situation that I at least perceived when I was a young person during the Cold War. So MAGA is third world aligned. MAGA wants a multipolar world. They almost attack George W. Bush for the wrong reasons. Like, we don't want to go back to the neocons where we're tripping over borders and influencing people. We actually want to get really ensconced in this nation where we're tariffing everyone. We have no connections. Why would you even want to travel? We don't like you, but you don't like us. That's great. We're just going to be these nationalists within our own border. It's a third world ideology. It's going against what made America great, to be honest. And what made America powerful, what allowed America to win the Cold War, was not the fact that we were nationalistic and tariffing our allies and enemies alike. It just isn't. And so MAGA itself has become a sort of multipolar third world force where it wants to tear down the American empire. And so Trump is a fascinating figure. If we agree with your theory, which I'm much more inclined to after reading your article and talking with you, I do think that you have offered a key that can unlock a lot of doors about it. Trump himself becomes a fly in the ointment or an ambiguous or even tragic figure because in the 80s up through the Reform Party period, Trump is sort of a liberal, He's a pro-America, big-talking, rich as hell liberal. And he's now in control of MAGA that is inexorably, I believe, moving towards a kind of third world ideology, an anti-unipolar, anti-American empire ideology. And so he's kind of caught in between because if there's one thing that is going to bring down Trump and thus bring down a Likud aligned leader of the United States, it might be these damn Epstein files. So if your theory is correct, that the Epstein obsession is a kind of Likud operation directed at liberals who are Zionists, to be sure, but very willing to engage in a peaceful settlement with the Palestinians, including nationhood for the Palestinians. The Epstein obsession is directed against them. Then Trump is getting caught in the crosshairs. It's a remarkable situation. Maybe they think Trump is dispensable because all other Republicans, the other competing forces in the Republican Party are like the religious right, say Ted Cruz and company, or neocons, as they call them, like Lindsey Graham, and they're going to be pro-Likud as well. Maybe they're going to get rid of Trump and put in someone who is equally as sycophantic. Thoughts?
Oh, yeah, it is a tragic thing. I mean, we love Donald Trump, folks. He's the greatest. And it's hard. He taps into an avuncular, warm, friendly. He's, for all of his narcissism, it's a warm narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, the guy's full and he's pompous and he's buffoonish, but he is in a sense like a one-dimensional figure in a good way, that he doesn't have these infinite layers of complexity where he contemplates himself. You ask him, like, what do you pray about? And he's just like, well, I just do things.
Yeah.
I think you just got to keep doing things.
Yeah.
And prayer is a waste of time. Or
I think at one point they said, like, do you believe in God? And he was like, evangelical Christians, they voted for me, they love me, of course I believe in God. Like, that's how he thinks. He's never like had a dark night of the soul where he's like, is God real? I don't know. Like, he's never had that moment. It's just like, these people love me and I love that. I love you that you love me, kind of thing. Remarkable man.
he's kind of like, a child in the good. I mean, like Nietzsche's discussion of the weight of memory, and
Right.
you have to overcome that. It's like, in some ways, he doesn't remember the lies he told yesterday. And so he's
Mm-hmm.
fresh and he's a new man and he's youthful because of that. And so there is something aspirational about embodying the Trump archetype in terms of his personality. That is what has buoyed him past these bankruptcies and these failures and these divorces, things that would have ruined other people.